to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
My darlings, I bring you a rather fun little story. It's by Saki, who's kind of turned into my patron saint of narrating. He's, two of his stories are my best watched of all time. One of them for a rather unusual reason. The Wolves of Sirnagratz is apparently used in an English language course in Pakistan and India. And I have the only one on YouTube. So I have a lot of students of English watching that, which I wish I had known before because I have the worst German accent in it of all time. But the lumber room also gets a lot of views. Surprisingly not Open Window. I may have to redo that one because that is my all-time favorite. I think it's everybody's all-time favorite of Saki. Anyway, today I bring you a short one called The Jesting of Arlington, Stringham. Arlington Stringham made a joke in the House of Commons. It was a thin house and a very thin joke. Something about the Anglo-Saxon race having a great many angles. It is possible that it was unintentional, but a fellow member who did not wish it to be supposed that he was asleep because his eyes were shut laughed. One or two of the papers noted a laugh in brackets, and another, which was notorious for the carelessness of its political news, mentioned laughter. Things often begin that way. Arlington made a joke in the house last night, said Eleanor Stringham to her mother. In all the years we've been married, neither of us have made a joke, and I don't like it now. I'm afraid it's the beginning of a rift in the lute. What lute? Asked her mother. It's a quotation, said Eleanor. To say anything was a quotation was an excellent method in Eleanor's eyes for withdrawing it from discussion, just as you could always defend indifferent lamb late in the season by saying, it's mutton. And, of course, Arlington Stringham continued to tread the thorny path of conscious humor into which fate had beckoned him. The country looked very green, but after all, that's what it's there for, he remarked to his wife 2 days later. That's very modern, I dare say. Very clever, but I'm afraid it's wasted on me, she observed coldly. If she could have known how much effort it had cost him to make the remark, she might have greeted it in a kinder spirit. It is the tragedy of human endeavor that it works so often, unseen and unguessed. Arlington said nothing, not from injured pride, but because he was thinking hard for something to say. Eleanor mistook his silence for an assumption of tolerant superiority, and her anger prompted her to a further jibe. You had better tell it to Lady Isabel. I've no doubt she would appreciate it. Lady Isabel was seen everywhere with a fawn-colored collie at a time when everyone else kept nothing but Pekingese, and she had once eaten 4 green apples at an afternoon tea in the botanical gardens, so she was wildly credited with a rather unpleasant wit. The censors said she had slept in a hammock and understood Yeats' poems, but her family denied both stories. The rift is widening to an abyss, said Eleanor to her mother that afternoon. I should not tell that to anyone, remarked her mother, after long reflection. Naturally, I should not talk about it very much, said Eleanor. But why shouldn't I mention it to anyone? Because you can't have an abyss in a lute. There isn't room. Eleanor's outlook on life did not improve as the afternoon wore on. The page boy had brought from the library, by mere and world instead of by mere chance, the book which everyone denied having read. The unwelcome substitute appeared to be a collection of nature notes contributed by the author to the page of some northern weekly. And when one had been prepared to plunge with disapproving minds into a regrettable chronicle of ill-spent lives, it was intensely irritating to read, "The dainty yellow hammers are now with us, and flaunt their jaundiced livery from every bulb and hillock." Besides, the thing was so obviously untrue. Either there must be hardly any bushes or hillocks in those parts of the country must be fearfully overstocked with yellow hammers. The thing scarcely seemed worth telling such a lie about. And the page boy stood there, with his sleek brushed and parted hair, and his air of chaste and callous indifference to the desire and passions of the world. Eleanor hated boys, and she would have liked to have whipped this one long and often. It was perhaps the yearning of a woman who had no children of her own. She turned at random to another paragraph. "Lie quietly concealed in the fern and bramble in the gap by the rowan tree, and you may see, almost every evening during early summer, a pair of lesser white-throats creeping up and down the nettles and hedge-growth that mask their resting place." The insufferable monotony of the proposed recreation. Eleanor would not have watched the most brilliant performance at His Majesty's Theatre for a single evening under such uncomfortable circumstances, and to be asked to watch lesser white-throats creeping up and down a nettle almost every evening during the height of the season struck her as an imputation on her intelligence that was positively offensive. Impatiently she transferred her attention to the dinner menu, which the boy had thoughtfully brought in as an alternative to the more solid literary fare. Rabbit curry met her eye, and the lines of disapproval deepened on her already puckered brow. The cook was a great believer in the influence of environment, and nourished an obstinate conviction that if you brought rabbit and curry powder together in one dish, a rabbit curry would be the result. And Clovis and the odious Barty Van Tan were coming to dinner. Surely, thought Eleanor, if Arlington knew how much she had that day to try her, he would refrain from joke-making. At dinner that night it was Eleanor herself who mentioned the name of a certain statesman who may be decently covered under the disguise of X. "X," said Arlington Stringham, "has the soul of a meringue." It was a useful remark to have on hand, because it applied equally well to 4 prominent statesmen of the day, which quadrupled the opportunity for using it. "Meringues haven't got a soul," said Eleanor's mother. "It's a mercy they haven't," said Clovis. "They would be always losing them, and people like my aunt would get up missions to meringues and say it was wonderful how much one could teach them, and how much more one could learn from them." "What could you learn from a meringue?" asked Eleanor's mother. "My aunt has been known to learn humility from an ex-viceroy," said Clovis. "I wish cook would learn to make a curry, or at least have sense to leave it alone," said Arlington, suddenly and savagely. Eleanor's face softened. It was like one of his old remarks in the days where there was no abyss between them. It was during the debate on the Foreign Office vote that Stringham made his great remark that the people of Crete unfortunately make more history than they can consume locally. It was not brilliant, but it came in the middle of a dull speech, and the House was quite pleased with it. Old gentlemen with bad memories said it reminded them of Disrael. It was Eleanor's friend, Gertrude Ilpton, who drew her attention to Arlington's newest outbreak. Eleanor, in these days, avoided the morning papers. "It's very modern, I suppose, very clever." "Of course it's clever," said Gertrude. "All Lady Isabel's sayings are clever, and lucky they bear repeating." "Are you sure it's one of her sayings?" asked Eleanor. "My dear, I've heard her say it a dozen times." "So that's where he gets his humor," said Eleanor slowly, and the hard lines deepened around her mouth. The death of Eleanor Stringham from an overdose of chirol occurred at the end of a rather uneventful season, excited a certain amount of unobtrusive speculation. Clovis, who perhaps exaggerated the importance of curry in the home, hinted at domestic sorrow. And of course Arlington never knew. It was just the tragedy of his life that he should miss the fullest effect of his jesting. So quoth this raven. My darlings, do you have someone in your life who was born with a serious lack of humor? This was many, many years ago, so I'm sure there's some help for them now. Next, I have another short little story by Eloquent Ursula. This little gem is entitled Fish Tank. Melinda loved going to the hospital. Everybody was so kind to her and gave her all sorts of treats, and they always had an extra nice meal at home. And nothing hurt that much. The hospital was such a fun place anyway. More toys than she had ever had at home. And there was a huge model train set with different stations and little people and buttons you could press to make the lights go on and off, and the rails turn and click. But best of all was the giant fish tank. The big glass window covered an entire wall almost, and there were many colorful, beautiful fish, big and small, swimming about, in and out of a beautiful mermaid palace, with silver and green lights, and a ship and all sorts of wavy plants and fantastic rocks. Melinda could look at them forever, which was just as well, because sometimes the hospital visits took hours and hours. But Melinda could never get bored watching the fish. She was there so much these days that she recognized most of them and gave them names. The bright pink and yellow one she called Flower, and then Sucker 1 and Sucker 2, who stuck to the glass pane and cleaned it, and Leopard, Funky, and silly Daisy with her round open mouth, and the big ones, Moon and Ocean. But Flower was her favorite, with her stunning colors, and she swam about even more gracefully than did the others. As Melinda spent more and more time there, she began making up stories about the fish, how Flower and Funky were her best friends and swam about in the mermaid's palace and the ship together, and wouldn't play with silly Daisy, and how Moon and Ocean squabbled over the food and wouldn't share it properly with the rest. But wise old Leopard would talk to them and make sure everyone got their fair share. Sometimes, when it hurt a lot, Moon and Ocean would behave even more badly. They bullied Funky and Flower until they escaped to the palace and hid. One time it hurt so much, and that was when Daisy got her silly open mouth stuck on one of the smaller spiky plants and was squiggling frantically, head down, trying to break free. The eye facing Melinda was wide open and terrified. Daisy wasn't there at all the next hospital visit. It must have been a few visits after, that when everything was awful and Melinda screamed with pain. Later on, she was in the waiting room, and she watched Moon and Ocean chase Flower, tearing pieces off her delicate, beautiful, floaty fins, and then her body. Flower was swimming crookedly. Funky and Leopard were hiding in the mermaid's palace. Melinda watched in horror as Moon and Ocean ripped Flower apart as she was still moving, bright pink and yellow pieces of her falling slowly to the tank floor. Melinda's knees buckled, and she fell too. And she never watched the fish after that. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.